When people argue about ancient Egypt versus ancient Greece, most of the time they're not really talking about history. They're talking about legacy or influence on the modern world. But that's not what actually tells us who was stronger. Because power isn't just about big names or famous thinkers. It's about resources, military capacity, economic stability, and how dominant a civilization was relative to the world it lived in. At its peak, Egypt was a tightly organized superstate, with controlled food supply, stable prices, and regional dominance that lasted centuries. At its peak, Greece, under Macedonian leadership, created the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen in a single generation. Two completely different models of power, two completely different economic systems, and two very different definitions of strength. So the question isn't which one influenced us more today. The real question is, who was stronger at their peak, judged only by the standards of their own time? That's what we're breaking down. Ancient Egypt versus ancient Greece. Let's begin. To make this comparison fair, we have to be very specific about when we're talking about, because neither Egypt nor Greece was powerful in the same way for their entire history. For Egypt, we're looking at the New Kingdom period, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE. This was Egypt at its absolute peak, expanding beyond the Nile, controlling Nubia, projecting power into the Levant, and operating one of the most stable economic systems the ancient world had ever seen. For Greece, we're focusing on the Macedonian era under Alexander the Great, from 336 to 323 BCE. This was the moment when the Greek world stopped being a collection of city-states and became the core of a massive empire stretching across 3 continents. What makes this comparison interesting, and honestly surprising, is that these two civilizations peaked in very different global environments. Egypt rose in a world where long-term stability was rare, and survived by mastering agriculture, logistics, and state control. Greece peaked in a highly competitive, interconnected world, where speed, innovation, and military efficiency mattered more than longevity. So this isn't a battle between pyramids and philosophers. It's a comparison between stable imperial power and explosive expansion. With that context in mind, let's start with the first category, geopolitical power. When we talk about global influence in the ancient world, we're not talking about modern globalization. We're talking about who controlled land, who shaped regional politics, and which civilizations other powers had to respect. Let's start with ancient Egypt at its peak. During the New Kingdom, Egypt evolved from a river-based kingdom into a dominant regional superpower. It directly controlled the entire Nile Valley and extended its rule south into Nubia, a region critical for gold and raw materials. To the north and east, Egypt projected power into the Levant, using a mix of military presence, diplomacy, and long-term vassal states. Egyptian influence wasn't chaotic or fast. It was organized, centralized, and sustainable. From an economic perspective, this mattered. Control over trade routes, food production, and resource flows gave Egypt leverage without constant warfare. Now let's look at ancient Greece during the Macedonian era. Under Alexander the Great, Greek-led forces created the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. In just over a decade, this empire stretched across Europe, North Africa, and deep into Asia. Greece didn't just influence these regions, it ruled them directly. Political authority, military command, and administrative systems were imposed across multiple civilizations. Greek language and culture spread rapidly, connecting regions that had never been unified before. From a geopolitical standpoint, this level of reach was unprecedented for its time. Now that we've broken everything down, let's put numbers on it. Ancient Egypt, 8.5 out of 10. Egypt achieved strong and lasting regional dominance. It controlled key territories like Nubia and influenced the Levant through diplomacy, trade, and military presence. Its power was stable and respected, but largely limited to its surrounding regions. Ancient Greece, 9.5 out of 10. At its peak under Macedonian leadership, Greece exercised direct control over an unprecedented amount of territory across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Its influence was broader and more global for its era, even if less stable over the long term. Military strength. Military power was one of the most decisive forces in the ancient world. It determined who could defend territory, project force, and survive long term. Let's start with ancient Egypt at its prime during the New Kingdom. Egypt maintained a professional standing army supported directly by the state. Its strength came from disciplined infantry, elite chariot units, and strong border fortifications. The Nile gave Egypt a major strategic advantage. It allowed reliable logistics, fast troop movement, and consistent supply during campaigns. A clear example of Egyptian military capability was the Battle of Kadesh, where Egypt faced the Hittite Empire, one of the strongest military powers of the time, and avoided defeat while maintaining regional balance. However, Egypt's military doctrine prioritized defense, control, and stability. It rarely pursued rapid or large-scale conquest beyond its core regions. Now let's look at ancient Greece at its prime. Greek military strength combined Spartan discipline with Macedonian innovation. Sparta produced some of the most rigorously trained soldiers of the ancient world. Spartan hoplites were professional warriors, trained from childhood, and known for exceptional discipline and battlefield cohesion. Macedonian leadership later expanded this system. The long spear phalanx, heavy cavalry, and coordinated tactics created a highly flexible and aggressive military force. Under Alexander the Great, Greek-led armies defeated the Persian Empire, often while outnumbered, and operated successfully across multiple terrains. Military strength scores: Ancient Egypt, 8 out of 10. Egypt earns a high score for organization, logistics, and long-term effectiveness. Its military was reliable and powerful within its regional context, but its conservative strategy limits its score compared to more expansion-focused forces. Ancient Greece, 9.5 out of 10. Greece scores near the maximum due to superior training, tactical innovation, and unmatched battlefield success during its peak. Its ability to defeat larger empires and conquer vast territory places it at the top for its era. Wealth and economic capacity. Economic strength determined how long a civilization could sustain power. Armies, infrastructure, and stability all depended on wealth. Let's start with ancient Egypt at its prime during the New Kingdom. Egypt had one of the most reliable economies in the ancient world. Its wealth came from agriculture, not conquest. The Nile's predictable flooding produced consistent food surpluses. This allowed the state to store grain, feed large populations, support armies, and massive construction projects. Egypt also controlled gold mines in Nubia, making it one of the richest gold-producing states of its era. The economy was centralized and state-managed, which reduced volatility and made long-term planning possible. Now let's look at ancient Greece at its prime. Greece's economic strength peaked under Macedonian rule. Unlike Egypt, Greek wealth came largely from expansion and conquest. After defeating Persia, Greek leadership gained access to massive gold and silver reserves, tribute from conquered regions, control over major trade routes. Greek cities also used coin-based economies, which encouraged trade, specialization, and commercial growth. However, this wealth depended on continued political and military control. Without expansion, the system was harder to sustain long-term. Scores: Ancient Egypt, 9 out of 10. Egypt scores very high due to stable agricultural output, state control, and long-term economic sustainability with low volatility. Ancient Greece, 8.5 out of 10. Greece achieved enormous wealth at its peak, but its economy relied heavily on conquest and imperial extraction, making it slightly less stable than Egypt's system. Inflation and price stability. Inflation might sound like a modern concept, but price stability mattered just as much in the ancient world. It affected food security, wages, and the ability of the state to function. Let's start with ancient Egypt at its prime. Egypt operated on a commodity-based economy, with grain acting as the main unit of value. Because the state controlled grain storage and distribution, prices remained relatively stable for long periods of time. As long as the Nile flooded normally, food supply stayed consistent and inflation remained low. Economic shocks existed, such as droughts or invasions. But outside of these events, Egypt maintained one of the most stable price systems of the ancient world. Now let's look at ancient Greece at its prime. Greek economies relied heavily on metal coinage, especially silver and gold. During the Macedonian era, huge amounts of Persian treasure entered circulation. This sudden increase in money supply boosted spending and trade, but it also caused price pressure, especially in major cities. While inflation was not catastrophic, It was noticeably higher and more volatile than in Egypt's system. Scores for inflation. Ancient Egypt, 9.5 out of 10. Egypt earns a near maximum score for long-term price stability, driven by state-controlled food supply and predictable agricultural output. Ancient Greece, 8 out of 10. Greece earns a solid score for maintaining functional coin-based markets and supporting large-scale trade. While expansion and inflows of precious metals increased price pressure, inflation remained manageable by the standards of its era. Let's review for final feature. Technology level. Technology shaped how effectively a civilization could use its resources, fight wars, and manage society. Let's start with ancient Egypt during the New Kingdom. Egyptian technology focused on reliability and durability. They mastered stone construction, large-scale engineering, irrigation systems, and practical medicine. Their tools and methods changed slowly, but they were refined to a high level and worked consistently for centuries. This made Egypt technologically stable, even if innovation progressed at a slower pace. Now let's look at ancient Greece. Greek technology emphasized innovation and adaptability. Advances included military engineering and siege weapons, shipbuilding and navigation, mathematics, mechanics, and applied science. Greek thinkers actively experimented, tested ideas, and improved existing technologies more rapidly than most ancient societies. Technology level. Final scores. Ancient Egypt, 8.5 out of 10. Egypt scores high for durable, well-perfected technologies that supported long-term stability. Ancient Greece, 9 out of 10. Greece scores higher due to faster innovation, experimentation, and broader application of technology across military and civil life. Now, let's briefly explain why each civilization ends up with its final average score, based purely on performance within its own historical context. Egypt's score is driven by consistency and stability. For its era, Egypt achieved long-term regional dominance, one of the most reliable agricultural systems in history, exceptional price stability, strong, well-organized military defense. So ancient Egypt final average it's 8.7 out of 10. Its slightly lower scores in military expansion and innovation reflect a deliberate strategy. Egypt prioritized control and sustainability over rapid conquest or constant technological change. At its peak, ancient Greece excelled in military power, expansion, and technological innovation. While its economy and price stability were slightly less consistent, they remained strong by the standards of the ancient world. When all categories are averaged relative to its era, the result is clear. Final average score for ancient Greece, 8.9 out of 10. A civilization that pushed ancient power close to its maximum limits. If you have any ancient country or modern country in your mind that I can compare them logically, let me know in comment section. Good luck.